They say a mother knows. They say we can feel it in our bones when something threatens our children. But what happens when that feeling comes too late? What happens when you realize the danger only after you've already buried your son? My name is Madeline Carter. I'm 63 years old, and I live in Richmond, Virginia. 3 days ago, I lowered my only son into the ground, and I discovered that sometimes the monsters we fear don't hide in shadows. They sleep in our children's beds. Daniel was everything to me. After my husband Robert passed away 12 years ago from a sudden heart attack, Daniel became my anchor, my reason to keep going. He was a structural engineer, brilliant and kind, with his father's gentle eyes and my stubborn determination. At 35, he had his whole life ahead of him. He and Melissa had been married for 7 years, and though they hadn't been blessed with children yet, they seemed happy. Or so I thought. The funeral was held on a gray October morning at Riverview Cemetery. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and grief. I stood at the graveside, supported by my sister Patricia, barely able to stand as they prepared to lower Daniel's casket. The doctors said it was cardiac arrest, sudden, unexpected, tragic. Sometimes these things just happen, they told me with sympathetic eyes that offered no comfort. I watched through tears as family and friends paid their respects. Daniel's colleagues from the engineering firm came, some of them weeping openly. His childhood friends stood with bowed heads. Everyone was devastated. Everyone except one person. Melissa stood across from me, dressed in black, her face partially hidden behind a veil. I watched her throughout the service, and something felt wrong. While I clutched Daniel's favorite photograph to my chest and sobbed, while Patricia trembled beside me, while Daniel's best friend Marcus broke down completely, I saw it. Just for a moment, when she thought no one was looking, Melissa's lips curved into the smallest smile. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a smile, at my son's funeral. My blood ran cold. I told myself I was imagining things, that grief was playing tricks on my mind, but I couldn't shake the image. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of the home Daniel had grown up in, and that smile haunted me. At 2 a.m, I got up, got dressed, and drove to the house Daniel and Melissa had shared, a beautiful colonial-style home in the West End that Daniel had purchased for $385,000 3 years ago. I still had my key. Daniel had insisted I keep it, just in case. I let myself in quietly. The house was dark and silent. My heart pounded as I climbed the stairs to their bedroom. The door was slightly ajar. I could hear Melissa's steady breathing. She was asleep. I slipped inside, my hands shaking. Something drew me to the walk-in closet. Call it mother's intuition or divine intervention. I opened the door carefully and turned on my phone's flashlight. On the top shelf, hidden behind shoeboxes, I found them. 3 empty bottles. The labels had been peeled off, but there were residual stains. And there, tucked beneath the bottles, was a small piece of paper, folded once. I opened it with trembling fingers. The handwriting was neat, feminine. It read, "2 drops will be enough." The room spun. I grabbed the shelf to steady myself. 2 drops of what? Enough for what? My mind raced back to Daniel's sudden death, to the cardiac arrest that made no sense for a healthy 35-year-old man, to Melissa's smile at the funeral. Before I share what happened next, I need to ask you something. If this story is gripping you the way it's gripped me, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. I need to tell this story, and I need people to hear it. Also, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Your support means everything as I relive the darkest period of my life. I stood in that closet for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. My mind was at war with my heart. This was Melissa, Daniel's wife, the woman who had stood beside my son for 7 years, the woman who had held my hand at Robert's funeral, the woman I had welcomed into our family with open arms. Could I really be thinking what I was thinking? But that note, those bottles, that smile. I carefully photographed everything with my phone, making sure the flash was off. Then I took the bottles and the note, wrapping them in a plastic bag I found in the bathroom. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. As I turned to leave, I heard movement from the bedroom. I froze, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. "Daniel?" Melissa's sleepy voice called out. "Is that you?" The words pierced through me like shards of glass. She was still calling for him. Was this the voice of a grieving widow, or something more sinister? I held my breath, pressed against the closet wall in the darkness. After a moment, I heard her sigh and roll over. Soon, her breathing returned to its steady rhythm. I waited another 10 minutes before creeping out of the house. The drive home was a blur. By the time I reached my driveway, the sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. A beautiful morning that felt obscene given the darkness I'd uncovered. I didn't waste time. At 9 o'clock sharp, I called my nephew James, who worked as a detective with the Richmond Police Department. At 42, James had seen his share of darkness in this city, but I knew what I was about to tell him would shake even him. "Aunt Maddie?" His voice was thick with concern when he answered. "How are you holding up?" "James, I need you to come to my house, now. And I need you to come as a detective, not as my nephew." There was a pause. "What's going on?" "I think Melissa killed Daniel." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. Then, "I'm on my way." James arrived 30 minutes later, still in his civilian clothes, jeans and a button-down shirt. His face was drawn, exhausted. He'd taken Daniel's death hard. They'd been close growing up, more like brothers than cousins. I sat him down at my kitchen table and told him everything. About the smile at the funeral, about my midnight visit, about the bottles and the note. His expression grew darker with every word. When I finished, he ran his hand through his hair, a gesture so like Daniel's that it made my chest tighten. "Aunt Maddie, what you did, breaking into their house, taking evidence, if there is something here, you might have compromised any potential investigation." I had to know, James. I had to. He studied the bottles and the note, careful not to touch them directly. "These need to go to the lab, but I have to be honest with you, this is going to be complicated. Daniel was cremated yesterday. Melissa insisted on it, said it was what he would have wanted." My stomach dropped. "Cremated? Already? James, we didn't even discuss." She had the legal right as his wife, and in her defense there was no reason to suspect anything. The death certificate said natural causes. He looked at me with pity and something else, belief. "But this note, 2 drops will be enough. If what you're thinking is true, if she poisoned him, she's smart. She got rid of the evidence before anyone could question anything. So that's it? She gets away with murdering my son?" "I didn't say that." James's jaw set with determination. "Daniel's medical records still exist. If there was poison in his system, there might be traces in the blood work they did at the hospital. It's a long shot, but it's something. And I'm going to request a full investigation. But Aunt Maddie, you need to prepare yourself. This is going to get ugly. If Melissa did this, she's not going to go down without a fight." I looked at my nephew, this man who had grown up running through my backyard with Daniel, who had been a pallbearer at my son's funeral just yesterday, and I felt something harden inside me. Let it get ugly. She killed my boy, James. She killed my Daniel. I will spend every penny I have, every breath left in my body, to make sure she pays for what she's done. James reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Then we do this right. We do this by the book, and we make sure that when we take her down, she stays down." The next 48 hours were excruciating. James had to move carefully. Without a body to examine, and with the death certificate already listing natural causes, getting approval for a full investigation was like pushing a boulder uphill. But he was relentless, calling in favors, presenting the evidence I'd found, arguing his case to anyone who would listen. Meanwhile, I had to pretend everything was normal. I had to face Melissa at the post-funeral gathering at their house, had to accept her tearful embrace, had to listen as she sobbed about how much she missed Daniel. It took every ounce of strength I had not to scream the truth in her face. "He was my everything, Madeline," she wept, clinging to me in the crowded living room. People milled around with plates of food and hushed conversations. "I don't know how I'm going to survive without him." I held her stiffly, my skin crawling at her touch. Up close, I could see the fine lines around her eyes, the careful application of her makeup. Melissa had always been beautiful in a calculated way. Perfectly highlighted blonde hair, expertly contoured features, designer clothes that she insisted on buying, even when Daniel worried about their finances. She was 35, but looked 10 years younger, thanks to what Daniel had once mentioned were regular visits to an expensive medical spa. "You'll get through this," I said mechanically. "We all will." She pulled back, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "I keep thinking about our plans, you know. We were going to start trying for a baby this year. Daniel wanted to be a father so badly. Her voice broke convincingly. Now that dream is gone forever. I wanted to vomit. Instead, I excused myself and found Patricia in the kitchen, helping to organize the endless stream of casseroles and baked goods that neighbors had dropped off. I can't do this, I whispered to my sister. I can't stand here and listen to her lies. Patricia, who knew everything, gave me a warning look. You have to. If she suspects you know something, she could run, destroy evidence, anything. James said to act normal. Normal. How could anything ever be normal again? That evening, after the guests had left, I sat in my car across the street from Daniel and Melissa's house, watching. The lights were on in the living room. Through the window, I could see Melissa moving around. She wasn't crying now. She was on her phone, pacing, and even from this distance, I could see she was animated, excited even. My phone buzzed. A text from James. Got the green light. They're pulling Daniel's hospital records, also looking into Melissa's background. Might have something by tomorrow. I texted back. I'm watching her house. She's on the phone. Looks happy. Go home, Aunt Maddie. Let me handle this. You being there is risky, but I couldn't leave. Not yet. I watched as Melissa ended her call and walked to the kitchen. She poured herself a glass of wine. Red, Daniel's favorite expensive Cabernet from the collection he'd started years ago, spending over $3,000 on bottles he said they'd open for special occasions. She raised the glass in a toast to no one, smiled, and took a long drink. That's when I knew for certain. This wasn't grief. This was celebration. My phone rang, startling me. It was Patricia. Where are you? I've been calling the house. I'm outside Melissa's place. Madeline, you need to leave. Now. If she sees you, she won't. I'm parked far enough away. This isn't healthy. Come stay with me tonight, please. I started the car. I'm coming. But Patricia, I saw her face. She's happy. She's actually happy that Daniel is dead. Then let James prove it. Let the police do their job. James called me at 7 the next morning. I hadn't slept at all, lying awake in Patricia's guest room, staring at the ceiling and replaying every interaction I'd ever had with Melissa, looking for signs I'd missed. The hospital records came through, James said without preamble. Daniel's blood work from the emergency room showed some anomalies that the doctors attributed to the cardiac arrest, but I sent the results to a toxicologist friend of mine, Aunt Maddie. She found traces of something that shouldn't be there, a compound that can cause cardiac arrest if administered in the right doses over time. My hand flew to my mouth. So I was right. She poisoned him. It looks that way. But here's the problem. The levels were low enough that they could argue it was environmental exposure or medication contamination. Without the actual poison, without Daniel's body, without a clear chain of evidence, a defense attorney could shred this. But it's enough to get a warrant to search the house and to bring Melissa in for questioning. When? This afternoon. I wanted to give you a heads up. This is going to hit the news, Aunt Maddie. Once we search the house, once we bring her in, everyone's going to know. Good. I want everyone to know what she did. There's something else. James's voice dropped. I had a forensic accountant friend take a look at Daniel and Melissa's finances. Just preliminary. Nothing official yet. Aunt Maddie, they were drowning in debt. Credit cards maxed out to the tune of $47,000, a second mortgage on the house totaling $125,000, personal loans. And 3 months ago, Daniel took out a life insurance policy for $750,000. Guess who the sole beneficiary is? The number hit me like a physical blow. $750,000. She killed him for money. It's looking that way. Daniel was worth more to her dead than alive. And from what I can tell, most of that debt was hers. Shopping, spa treatments, that Mercedes she drives that cost $68,000. Daniel was working overtime, taking on extra projects, trying to keep up with her spending. The life insurance was probably his way of trying to ensure she'd be taken care of if something happened to him. He had no idea he was signing his own death warrant. I felt rage building inside me like a tsunami. My son had worked himself to the bone for this woman, had sacrificed and struggled to give her the lifestyle she demanded, and she'd repaid him by ending his life. I gave them $50,000 2 years ago when Daniel said they were having trouble, I said, my voice shaking. He told me it was for house repairs. I took it out of the savings Robert left me. She spent my dead husband's money on her luxuries while plotting to kill my son. I'm sorry, Aunt Maddie. I know this is... Don't apologize. Just promise me you'll get her. Promise me she'll pay. I promise. The warrant is being executed at 3 o'clock. Do you want to be there? Yes. I thought you might. I'll pick you up at 2:30. The next few hours crawled by. Patricia tried to get me to eat, but I couldn't. I showered, dressed in my best clothes, a navy blue dress suit that Robert had always said made me look formidable. I wanted to look formidable. I wanted Melissa to see me and know that I'd unraveled her evil plan. James arrived exactly at 2:30, this time in his official capacity, badge on his belt, serious expression in place. Patricia hugged me at the door. Call me as soon as it's over. The drive to Daniel's house took 15 minutes. 3 police cars were already there, parked in front. Neighbors were emerging from their houses, curious about the commotion. James parked and turned to me. This is going to be hard to watch. Are you sure you want to do this? I've never been more sure of anything. Melissa answered the door in yoga pants and an oversized sweater, her hair in a messy bun. When she saw the police, the color drained from her face. What's going on? Is something wrong? Detective Sarah Chen, James's partner, held up the warrant. Mrs. Carter, we have a warrant to search the premises. Step aside, please. Search? For what? I don't understand. Melissa's eyes found me standing behind the officers, and something flickered across her face. Fear? Recognition? Madeline, what is this? Why are they here? I said nothing. James had warned me not to engage, to let them handle it. But I held her gaze, letting her see that I knew, that I'd figured it out. We need you to wait outside while we conduct our search, Detective Chen said firmly. Do you need to get a coat? Yes, Melissa seemed to be in shock. She grabbed a jacket from the coat rack and allowed herself to be escorted onto the front lawn. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered, whispering behind their hands. I watched as recognition and humiliation warred on Melissa's face. Good. Let her feel a fraction of the shame and pain she'd caused. The search took 3 hours. I stood across the street with James, who had to stay outside to avoid any conflict of interest concerns. We watched as officers carried out bags of evidence, boxes of documents, Daniel's laptop, Melissa's phone. They're being thorough, James said. That's good. Melissa sat on the front steps, wrapped in her jacket, shaking. Occasionally she'd look over at me, and each time I'd stare back unflinchingly. Let her squirm. Let her wonder how much I knew. Finally, Detective Chen emerged and walked over to Melissa. I couldn't hear what she said, but I saw Melissa's reaction. The way she stood up abruptly, the way her hand went to her throat, the way she shook her head violently. Then Chen said something else, and Melissa's knees buckled. 2 officers caught her before she hit the ground. James's phone rang. He listened for a moment, his expression grim, then ended the call. They found it. In the garage, hidden in a box of gardening supplies. A bottle with residue matching the compound in Daniel's blood. And there's more. Receipts, internet search history from her laptop, everything. They're bringing her in. I watched as they put Melissa in handcuffs. She was crying now, screaming about how this was a mistake, how she loved Daniel, how she would never hurt him. The neighbors watched in stunned silence as they loaded her into the back of a police car. As the car pulled away, Melissa's eyes locked with mine through the window, and in that moment, the mask dropped completely. The tears stopped. Her expression went cold, calculating, full of pure hatred. There was the real Melissa. There was my son's killer. It's over, James said quietly. But I knew better. This was just beginning. Melissa had money now, or she would have, once the insurance paid out. She could afford the best lawyers in Virginia. This wouldn't be simple. This wouldn't be easy. But I didn't care. I would see this through to the end, no matter what it cost me. For Daniel. The police station was a blur of fluorescent lights and echoing hallways. James had me wait in a small conference room while they processed Melissa's arrest. Through the glass window in the door, I could see officers moving back and forth, hear the muted sounds of phones ringing and voices talking. Detective Chen came in after about an hour, carrying a thick folder. She sat across from me, her expression a mixture of professional detachment and something that looked like sympathy. Mrs. Carter, I wanted to update you personally. Melissa is currently being questioned. She's demanded a lawyer, which is her right, but before the lawyer arrived, she said some things you should know about. My heart raced. What things? Chen opened the folder, revealing photographs of the evidence they'd collected. The bottle we found in the garage contains a substance called oleandrin. It's a cardiac glycoside, essentially a natural poison that comes from oleander plants. In small doses over time, it can cause fatal heart arrhythmia that looks exactly like natural cardiac arrest. It's nearly perfect if you want to commit murder. Where did she get it? That's where it gets interesting. We found receipts showing that Melissa purchased oleander plants from 3 different nurseries over the past 6 months, spending about $340 in total. We also found a book on her Kindle about poisonous plants and how they've been used throughout history. And here's the kicker. Her internet search history is damning. Untraceable poisons, how to cause heart attack, life insurance payout timeline, can oleander be detected in autopsy? She searched for all of this on her personal laptop. I felt sick. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was calculated, premeditated murder. How long was she planning this? At least 6 months, possibly longer. We're still piecing together the timeline, but it appears she started researching about 8 months ago, shortly after Daniel took out that life insurance policy. We found emails between Melissa and the insurance agent where she was pushing Daniel to increase the coverage amount. He originally wanted $500,000. She convinced him to go with $750,000. And he never suspected anything? Chen's expression softened. Mrs. Carter, your son was a good man who trusted his wife. People like Melissa are skilled manipulators. They know how to play the role, how to seem loving and devoted while planning something monstrous. Is the evidence enough? Will you be able to convict her? The district attorney is confident. We have the poison, we have the internet searches, we have the financial motive, we have the toxicology report showing the compound in Daniel's blood. It's circumstantial, but it's a strong circumstantial case. However, I need to be honest with you. She's already lawyered up with Marcus Devereaux. I felt my stomach drop. Even I knew that name. Marcus Devereaux was one of the most expensive and successful criminal defense attorneys in Virginia, with a reputation for getting guilty clients acquitted through technicalities and reasonable doubt. How can she afford him? The life insurance won't pay out if she's charged with murder. Her parents, they're wealthy, old money from Charlottesville. We contacted them, and they're already here, posting her $500,000 bail and hiring Devereaux. They're maintaining their daughter's innocence. Of course they are. I felt rage building again. Melissa would be out tonight, probably back in that house she'd shared with Daniel, sleeping in the bed where she'd lain next to my son while poisoning him slowly. She's going to walk free while my son is in the ground? Bail conditions will be strict. She'll wear an ankle monitor, can't leave the state, has to surrender her passport. But yes, Mrs. Carter, she'll be out pending trial. I'm sorry. James came in then, looking exhausted. The lawyer's here. Devereaux himself. This is going to be a battle. Over the next few days, the case exploded into the media. Richmond woman accused of poisoning husband for insurance money, read the headlines. My phone rang constantly, reporters wanting comments, old friends expressing shock, acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly reaching out. I ignored most of them. But I did agree to one interview with a local news station because I wanted people to know who Daniel was. I wanted them to understand what had been lost. Daniel Carter was a kind, generous man, I told the reporter, sitting in my living room surrounded by photos of my son. He worked overtime at his engineering firm to provide for his wife. He gave her everything she wanted. He trusted her completely. And she repaid that trust by taking his life for money. The interview aired that night. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. How dare you? Melissa's voice was cold, controlled. How dare you go on television and slander me? I loved Daniel. I would never hurt him. I know what you did, I said quietly. I found the bottles. I found your note. The police found everything else. There was silence on the other end. Then, you broke into my house. You violated my privacy. Anything you found will be thrown out of court. The warrant was legitimate. Everything the police found is admissible. You think you're so smart, don't you, Madeline? You think you've won? Let me tell you something. I will walk free from this. My lawyer is the best in the state. And when I do, I'm going to sue you for defamation, for harassment, for everything you've done to me. By the time I'm finished with you, you'll have nothing left. Then we'll both have lost our everything, I said. Except I lost mine to death. You'll lose yours to justice. I hung up before she could respond. 3 weeks after Melissa's arrest, I received a certified letter from Marcus Devereaux's office. Inside was a notice that Melissa was countersuing me for $200,000 in damages for unlawful entry, theft of property, and defamation of character. My hands shook as I read it. "It's the intimidation tactic," explained Rebecca Walsh, the attorney I'd hired to protect my interests. At 45, Rebecca was sharp, experienced, and expensive. I was paying her $350 per hour from the savings Robert had left me, but I needed someone who could navigate this nightmare. "Devereaux is trying to make you back off, to make you stop talking to the media, to paint you as a vindictive mother-in-law who can't accept her son's natural death. But I found evidence of murder, which you obtained by entering her home without permission. Devereaux is going to argue that you're obsessed, that you're seeing conspiracies where none exist, that you contaminated evidence. He's building a narrative where you're the villain and Melissa is the grieving widow being persecuted by her unstable mother-in-law." I felt the walls closing in. Can he win? The countersuit? Possibly, if we go to trial. But I think we can get it dismissed or settled. The real concern is how this affects the criminal case against Melissa. Devereaux is good at creating reasonable doubt, and your actions, however well-intentioned, have given him ammunition. The preliminary hearing was set for December 15th. As the date approached, I watched as Devereaux worked the media, giving carefully worded interviews about his client's innocence, about the tragedy of a young widow being falsely accused, about how rushed to judgment the police had been. Melissa played her part perfectly. She attended grief counseling sessions, making sure photographers caught her leaving the therapist's office, tissues in hand. She volunteered at a local animal shelter, because what could be more sympathetic than a grieving widow finding solace in helping abandoned pets? She gave one tearful interview to a sympathetic reporter, talking about how much she missed Daniel, how his death had destroyed her world, how the accusations had compounded her grief. "She's making me look crazy," I told Patricia as we watched the interview together. "Everyone's going to think I'm just a bitter old woman who can't let go. People who matter know the truth. The evidence speaks for itself." But did it? The more I learned about the case, the more I understood how Devereaux might create doubt. Yes, there was poison found in the garage, but Melissa claimed she'd never seen it before, that someone must have planted it. Yes, there were incriminating internet searches, but those could have been research for a crime novel she claimed she was writing. Yes, Daniel's blood contained traces of oleandrin, but the levels were low enough that Devereaux could argue it was accidental environmental exposure. The financial motive was strong, but Devereaux was arguing that Melissa didn't even know about the life insurance policy until after Daniel's death, that it had been Daniel's idea entirely. He produced emails where Daniel had initiated the insurance conversation, where he'd insisted on the $750,000 amount. The fact that Melissa had been in debt was explained away as marital financial struggles that many couples face. As for the note I'd found, 2 drops will be enough. Devereaux was claiming it was taken out of context, that it was a reminder about essential oils or plant fertilizer, that my interpretation was the paranoid fantasy of a grief-stricken mother looking for someone to blame. I felt myself drowning in doubt. What if I was wrong? What if Daniel really had died of natural causes and I'd destroyed an innocent woman's life? What if... No. I thought of that smile at the funeral. I thought of Melissa toasting with wine the night everyone else was mourning. I thought of the cold calculation in her eyes when they'd arrested her. I knew what I'd seen. I knew what she was. The preliminary hearing arrived like a looming storm. James picked me up early that morning. "Are you ready for this?" "No, but I'll never be ready. Let's just get it over with." The courthouse was packed with media and spectators. I had to push through a crowd of reporters shouting questions. Inside, the courtroom was somber and intimidating, all dark wood and serious faces. Melissa sat at the defense table with Devereaux, wearing a conservative black dress, her hair pulled back, minimal makeup. She looked young, vulnerable, innocent. She didn't look at me once. Judge Margaret Thornton presided over the preliminary hearing, a stern woman in her early 60s with silver hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. I sat in the gallery directly behind the prosecution table, where Assistant District Attorney David Morrison and his team had assembled their case. Morrison was 38, ambitious and determined. He'd told me before the hearing that he believed in the case, that justice would prevail. But as I watched Devereaux's confident swagger as he entered the courtroom, I felt my certainty waver. "Your Honor," Morrison began after the formalities were complete, The Commonwealth will show that Melissa Carter engaged in a calculated, premeditated murder of her husband, Daniel Carter, through the systematic administration of oleandrin poison over a period of several months. We will present evidence of motive, means, and opportunity. We will show that the defendant had a clear financial incentive as she stood to gain $750,000 from her husband's life insurance policy. We will show that she researched methods of undetectable poisoning, that she purchased the plants necessary to extract the poison, and that the poison was found in her possession. We will show that the victim's blood contained traces of this very poison. This was not a tragedy. This was a crime. Devereaux rose smoothly. Your Honor, what the prosecution will actually show is a series of coincidences and misinterpretations strung together by a grieving mother who cannot accept that her son died of natural causes. There is no direct evidence that Melissa Carter administered any poison to her husband. There is no witness who saw her do so. There is no confession. What there is a young woman who has lost the love of her life and is now being persecuted in her grief. The evidence will show that every single so-called proof of guilt has an innocent explanation. This case should never have been brought, and we ask that it be dismissed today. Over the next 4 hours, Morrison called his witnesses. First was Dr. Raymond Keating, the toxicologist who had analyzed Daniel's blood samples. The presence of oleandrin in the victim's blood is consistent with exposure to oleander poison, Dr. Keating testified. The levels, while not extremely high, are elevated above what we would expect from environmental exposure alone. Combined with the cardiac arrest, the timeline is consistent with chronic low-level poisoning. Devereaux's cross-examination was brutal. Dr. Keating, isn't it true that oleandrin can be absorbed through the skin? That someone could be exposed to it by gardening, by touching plants, by any number of innocent means? Yes, and isn't it true that you cannot say with absolute certainty that Daniel Carter was deliberately poisoned? That your findings are, at best, suggestive rather than conclusive? I can say that the levels are concerning and, please answer the question, doctor. Can you say with absolute certainty that this was deliberate poisoning? A pause. No, not with absolute certainty. I watched the judge's expression. She was taking notes, her face unreadable. Next came Detective Chen, who testified about the evidence found during the search. The bottle in the garage, the receipts for oleander plants, the internet search history. It was damning, but Devereaux was ready. Detective, isn't it true that oleander is a common ornamental plant in Virginia? That many people have it in their gardens? Yes, but the internet searches that could just as easily be research for a novel? You found evidence that Mrs. Carter was an aspiring writer, correct? We found some writing samples, yes, and the bottle found in the garage was found in a box of gardening supplies that multiple people had access to? The garage wasn't locked? Anyone could have placed that bottle there? Technically, yes, but thank you, Detective. The hearing continued. James testified about the financial investigation, about the debt and the insurance policy. Morrison presented the note I'd found. 2 drops will be enough, in its protective evidence bag. Then Devereaux called his first witness, Melissa. She took the stand looking fragile, her voice barely above a whisper. Under Devereaux's gentle questioning, she painted a picture of a happy marriage, of a couple facing financial stress but facing it together, of a woman destroyed by her husband's sudden death. Did you kill your husband, Mrs. Carter? Devereaux asked. No. Tears streamed down her face. I loved Daniel more than anything in this world. His death has destroyed me. These accusations have made an unbearable situation even worse. I don't know how that poison got in my garage. I don't know why Daniel had those chemicals in his blood. But I swear on everything holy that I didn't harm him. I couldn't. I wouldn't. Morrison's cross-examination was sharp. Mrs. Carter, can you explain the note that was found in your closet? 2 drops will be enough. It was about essential oils. I was making a blend for anxiety. 2 drops of lavender oil was enough for the mixture. Can you explain your internet search history? Untraceable poisons? How to cause heart attack? I was researching for a mystery novel. I've always wanted to write. Can you produce any pages of this alleged novel? A pause. I deleted them. After Daniel died, I couldn't write anymore. It felt wrong. How convenient. Can you explain why you seemed happy at your husband's funeral? Why his mother observed you smiling? Melissa's eyes flashed with anger, before she controlled herself. I never smiled at Daniel's funeral. That's a vicious lie. If Madeline Carter saw what she wanted to see, that's her problem, not mine. She's never liked me. She's always thought I wasn't good enough for her son. This is her revenge, turning a tragedy into a murder investigation based on her paranoid fantasies. I half rose from my seat, but Patricia grabbed my arm, holding me back. Melissa's eyes found mine across the courtroom, and for just a second, I saw it again. That flash of cold calculation, that hint of satisfaction. Then it was gone, replaced by tears and vulnerability. Judge Thornton called for a recess. During the recess, I stood in the courthouse hallway, my hands shaking so badly that Patricia had to help me drink water from a paper cup. Marcus Devereaux walked past with his team, his expression confident. He didn't even glance my way. "She's going to get away with it," I said to James, who had joined us. "The judge is going to dismiss the case. You don't know that." Morrison presented a strong case. "But we can't prove she actually gave him the poison." "We can't prove anything definitively. Devereaux has created enough doubt. Then we prepare for trial. We find more evidence. We don't give up." Rebecca Walsh joined us, her expression serious. "I've been watching the judge. This could go either way. But Madeline, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that this case gets dismissed today. And if it does, we regroup. The DA can still bring charges later if more evidence surfaces. Daniel will have been dead for months by then. The trail gets colder every day." "I know. I'm sorry." We were called back into the courtroom. Judge Thornton sat at her bench, her expression grave. The room fell silent. "I've reviewed all the evidence presented today, and I've considered the arguments of both counsel. This is a deeply troubling case. On one hand, we have a series of concerning coincidences and circumstantial evidence that suggests the possibility of foul play. On the other hand, we have a young woman whose husband died suddenly and whose grief has been compounded by serious criminal accusations." My heart sank. She was going to dismiss it. "However," Judge Thornton continued, "the totality of the circumstances, the presence of poison in the victim's blood, the poison found in the defendant's home, the financial motive, the internet search history, and the timeline of events creates sufficient probable cause to believe that a crime may have been committed. While much of this evidence is circumstantial, circumstantial evidence can be powerful evidence. The question of guilt or innocence is for a jury to decide, not for this court at a preliminary hearing." I grabbed Patricia's hand, afraid to hope. "Therefore, I am binding this case over for trial. The defendant will continue to be released on bail with the previously stated conditions. Trial date will be set at the next hearing. This court is adjourned." The gavel came down. I felt tears streaming down my face. It wasn't over. There would be a trial. There would be justice. Melissa's face went white. Devereaux leaned over to whisper to her, but she shook her head violently. As the bailiffs prepared to escort her out, she turned and looked directly at me. Her mask had completely slipped now. The hatred in her eyes was palpable. "You haven't won anything," she mouthed. The media frenzy outside was intense. Morrison gave a brief statement about respecting the judge's decision and looking forward to presenting the full case at trial. Devereaux countered with passionate declarations of his client's innocence and promises that the truth would emerge. I declined to speak to the press. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, but also filled with a grim determination. This was just the beginning of what would surely be a long battle. Over the next few weeks, Morrison's office continued to build their case. They interviewed Daniel's co-workers, friends, neighbors. They discovered that several people had noticed changes in Daniel in the months before his death. He'd seemed tired, had complained of feeling unwell, had mentioned stomach problems, all consistent with chronic low-level poisoning. They also discovered something else. Melissa had been having an affair. James called me with the news. His name is Trevor Marks. He's a personal trainer at the gym where Melissa worked out. They'd been seeing each other for at least a year, maybe longer. We have photos, text messages, hotel receipts. Daniel apparently had no idea. Another motive, another betrayal. Does Morrison know? He's adding it to the case. It shows consciousness of guilt. She wasn't happy in the marriage. She wanted out. And she chose murder instead of divorce because divorce wouldn't give her $750,000. But Devereaux, predictably, had a counter-narrative. When news of the affair broke publicly, he immediately arranged for Melissa to give another interview. This time with tears and remorse. "I made a terrible mistake," she sobbed on camera. "My marriage was struggling. Daniel was working all the time. We were under financial stress, and I was lonely. I turned to someone else, and I will regret that for the rest of my life. But an affair doesn't make me a murderer. Yes, I was unhappy, but I never wanted Daniel dead. If I'd wanted out of the marriage, I would have just gotten divorced. Except divorce would have meant splitting assets and possibly alimony payments you couldn't afford," I shouted at the television screen in my living room. Murder meant $750,000 and freedom. Patricia, who had essentially moved in with me to provide support, put a hand on my shoulder. "People see through her, Maddie. The comments on these articles, the social media posts. Most people believe she did it. Most people won't be on the jury." The trial date was set for March 15th, just over 5 months after Daniel's death. Morrison warned me it would be grueling. Devereaux would attack every aspect of the case, would try to paint Daniel's death as tragic but natural, would portray me as an obsessed mother who had corrupted the investigation with my illegal entry into Melissa's home. "He's going to put you on trial as much as Melissa," Morrison said during one of our preparation meetings. "You need to be ready for that. Let him try. I have nothing to hide. I did what I had to do to find the truth, and that's exactly what you'll say on the stand. But Madeline, he's going to try to shake you, to make you seem unreliable, emotional, biased. You have to stay calm, no matter what he says." I spent the next months preparing. Rebecca helped me understand what to expect. James drilled me on potential questions. Patricia was my constant support, making sure I ate, slept, and didn't completely lose myself to the darkness of what had happened. But every night, I dreamed of Daniel. Sometimes they were good dreams, memories of him as a child, laughing in the backyard, graduating from college, walking me down the aisle at a cousin's wedding after Robert died. Sometimes they were nightmares, Daniel calling out for help, while Melissa stood over him with that smile, that terrible smile, as the poison worked through his system. I would wake up gasping, and Patricia would come running to sit with me until I could breathe normally again. "How do you survive this?" I asked her one night after a particularly bad dream. "How do you keep going when your child is gone and the person responsible might walk free?" "You survive because Daniel would want you to," Patricia said firmly. "You survive because giving up means she wins completely. You survive because justice matters, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." And so I survived. I went to every hearing, every procedural meeting, every case conference. I spent $23,000 of my savings on Rebecca's fees. I gave interviews when Morrison thought it would help, raising public awareness of Daniel's case. I connected with other families who had lost loved ones to murder, drawing strength from their resilience. I also started a foundation in Daniel's name, the Daniel Carter Memorial Engineering Scholarship, funded with $30,000 from Robert's life insurance money that I'd been saving. If Melissa was going to profit from Daniel's death, at least his name would live on by helping young engineers pursue their dreams. The trial was fast approaching, and I was ready. The trial began on a cold March morning, with crowds of people lining up outside the courthouse, hoping for seats in the gallery. The case had captured public attention. The beautiful young widow accused of poisoning her husband, the grieving mother who had uncovered the crime, the mystery of whether justice would prevail. Jury selection took 3 days. Morrison was looking for people who could handle circumstantial evidence, who wouldn't need a smoking gun to convict. Devereaux wanted people who would demand absolute proof, who would give his client the benefit of the doubt. They ended up with 7 women and 5 men, ranging in age from 24 to 67. I studied each face, wondering who would decide Melissa's fate. Morrison's opening statement was powerful. He laid out the timeline, the evidence, the motive. He painted a picture of a woman who had cold-bloodedly murdered her husband for money, who had smiled at his funeral, who had calculated every step of her crime. Devereaux's opening was equally compelling. He portrayed Melissa as a victim of tragedy, of persecution, of a justice system that had rushed to judgment based on the word of a biased mother-in-law. He promised to show that every piece of evidence had an innocent explanation. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I attended every day, sitting in the same seat, wearing my armor of dignity and determination. The prosecution called their witnesses, the toxicologist, the detectives, the financial expert, Daniel's co-workers who testified about the changes they'd noticed in his health. They called Trevor Marks, the personal trainer Melissa had been having an affair with. He admitted to the relationship but claimed he'd known nothing about any plan to harm Daniel. Melissa said she was going to leave him, Trevor testified. She said she just needed to figure out the financial situation first. I had no idea she was thinking of anything else. Devereaux tore into him on cross-examination, suggesting that Trevor might have been more involved than he admitted, planting seeds of doubt about who was really responsible if a crime had even occurred. They called me to the stand on the 8th day of trial. My hands shook as I was sworn in, but my voice was steady as Morrison questioned me about Daniel's life, about the funeral, about the night I'd gone to Melissa's house. Mrs. Carter, why did you enter your daughter-in-law's home without permission? Because I knew something was wrong. I saw her smile at my son's funeral. A mother knows when something isn't right. I had to find out the truth. And what did you find? I found evidence that my son had been murdered. Devereaux's cross-examination was brutal, just as we'd prepared for. Mrs. Carter, isn't it true that you've never liked Melissa? That you felt she wasn't good enough for your son? I welcomed her into our family with open arms. But you thought she was too focused on material things, didn't you? You disapproved of her spending? I worried that the financial pressure was affecting Daniel, yes. And when your son died suddenly, you couldn't accept that it was natural causes, could you? You needed someone to blame? I needed the truth, and I found it. You found what you wanted to find. You broke into her home. You took items that didn't belong to you. You contaminated a potential crime scene, if there even was a crime. You were so convinced of her guilt that you made sure the evidence pointed that way, didn't you? That's not true. I found evidence that was already there. Or you planted evidence to support your theory. We only have your word about what you found in that closet. The bottles, the note, you were alone when you claimed to have discovered them. No one can verify your story. I photographed everything. You photographed what you claim you found. But again, you were alone. You could have written that note yourself. You could have staged the entire scene. I felt my composure cracking. Why would I do that? My son is dead. I just wanted to know why. Maybe because you couldn't accept that sometimes people just die. Maybe because blaming Melissa was easier than accepting that you couldn't save your son. Maybe because this entire case is built on a mother's grief-driven delusion. Morrison objected. The judge sustained it, but the damage was done. I could see some of the jurors looking at me with doubt. The trial continued. Melissa took the stand again, maintaining her innocence, crying at appropriate moments, insisting that she had loved Daniel and would never have harmed him. She was a good actress. I had to give her that. But Morrison was brilliant in his closing argument. He took the jury through every piece of evidence, showing how each one fit into the larger picture. The poison in Daniel's blood, the poison in Melissa's garage, the internet searches, the financial desperation and the insurance policy, the affair, the note, the smile at the funeral. Ladies and gentlemen, the defense wants you to believe that all of this is coincidence, that every single piece of evidence has an innocent explanation. But at what point do coincidences stop being coincidental? At what point do we recognize a pattern? Melissa Carter killed her husband. She did it slowly, methodically, over months. She watched him suffer. She watched him die. And then she smiled at his funeral because she thought she'd gotten away with it. She thought she'd committed the perfect crime. But she didn't count on a mother's love. She didn't count on Madeline Carter refusing to let her son's death go unexamined. Daniel Carter was murdered. The evidence proves it. And justice demands that you find the defendant guilty. Devereaux's closing painted me as a villain and Melissa as a victim. But I could see from some of the jurors' faces that they weren't buying it anymore. The jury deliberated for 16 hours over 2 days. I barely slept, barely ate. I prayed, something I hadn't really done since Robert died, praying that Daniel would get justice, that his death wouldn't be in vain. On the afternoon of the second day of deliberation, we got the call. The jury had reached a verdict. The courtroom was packed. Melissa sat at the defense table, her face pale. I sat in my usual spot, Patricia's hand gripping mine so tightly it hurt. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Thornton asked. "We have, Your Honor." "What say you?" The forewoman stood. "In the case of Commonwealth versus Melissa Carter, on the charge of first-degree murder, we find the defendant guilty." The courtroom erupted. I heard myself sob, a sound torn from deep inside me. Patricia was crying beside me. I could hear Melissa screaming, "No, no, this is wrong!" as the bailiffs moved to restrain her. Judge Thornton banged her gavel, calling for order. Through my tears, I watched as they led Melissa away, still protesting, still claiming innocence. But it was over. After months of investigation, hearings, and trial, justice had finally been served. Sentencing was set for 3 weeks later. Morrison was seeking life without parole. Given the premeditated nature of the crime, he was confident he'd get it. On the day of sentencing, Judge Thornton looked at Melissa with disgust. You murdered your husband in one of the most callous and calculated ways possible. You poisoned him slowly, watching him suffer, all for money. You have shown no remorse, no accountability. This court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Melissa was led away, and I finally felt like I could breathe again. In the months since, I've tried to rebuild my life. The insurance company, after the conviction, refused to pay Melissa the $750,000 policy. Instead, as Daniel's mother and next of kin, after a legal battle, I received it. I used $50,000 to pay off the debts Daniel had accumulated trying to keep Melissa happy. I donated another $200,000 to the Daniel Carter Memorial Engineering Scholarship, ensuring that his name would help students for years to come. The rest I put in trust for any potential grandchildren I might have from other family members, a legacy from the son I lost. I still visit Daniel's grave every week, placing fresh flowers and talking to him about everything, the trial, the conviction, how much I miss him. Some days are harder than others. Some days the grief threatens to consume me entirely. But I survived, and more importantly, I got justice for my boy. If you've watched this entire story, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Please, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Share it with anyone who needs to hear that justice is possible, even when everything seems hopeless. And leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love hearing from all of you around the world. Remember, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, investigate. Don't let anyone gaslight you into doubting what you know to be true. And most importantly, never give up on seeking justice for the ones you love. Daniel, my beautiful boy, this was for you. Rest in peace, my darling. Your mother made sure she paid for what she did to you.